walked 1.2 miles a few minutes ago.
And you're in your 80s and you just
Yeah.
walked 1.2 miles a few minutes ago.
I do it every day.
That's
Oh
amazing.
my goodness.
So
That's wonderful.
Dr. Tennant is going to love to hear that. That is so wonderful.
well, it makes me feel so much better. I can tell such a difference if I don't walk. Make myself. Now the weather's been nice, so it's not been a problem.
There you go. It makes it easier, right?
Right.
Hi, Dr.
Hi,
Tennant.
Dr. Tennant.
Hello.
Hi.
And of course, Pat is looking great, sounding great. I hope your week was good. It seemed like it was a blink and it was Thursday again.
You're right.
It sure went by quickly, that's for sure.
Yeah. I thought, is it just me? And then I get little 10-year-olds that tell me that time is flying. I'm like, oh, it's not just me.
My favorite saying is life is like a roll of toilet tissue. As you get older, the closer you get to the end, the faster it goes.
I like it. I like it.
It's that often. I love that.
I love that.
I'm gonna share that with my mom. She keeps telling me her and her dog are having a race. she's 85 and the dog's 14. So
I love it. That's awesome. Aw. Dr. Tennant, we've got Miss Marilyn with us, Marilyn Stubbs, and she said that she's the one that is in her 80s and she's still ambulatory, and she wanted you to know that she's here.
Oh, really? Fantastic.
Yes.
And I just finished a 1.2 mile walk a few minutes ago.
I think that's fantastic.
Thank you.
That's great.
Oh,
I'm so proud of you.
welcome, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's an
Welcome.
honor to have you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be in your study and working with you.
You're welcome. Yeah, we need to bottle you somehow and sell a little. We'll call it Stubville or something like that. Stub ointment. How's that?
There you go.
Thank you.
That's great. That's wonderful.
My overachieving has gone over into my arachnoiditis fight.
Oh, wow. You keep fighting, Marilyn. You keep fighting. It is now time for us to get started already. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Season 5, Episode 8 of your favorite show, Doc Talks, with Dr. Forrest Tennant and friends. We have such great news this evening. We've got wonderful guests and, of course, our wonderful Doc Talks family with us. Dr. Tennant, I know we have a lot ahead of us, so we'll go ahead and let you take over. It's all yours. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Yes, you've put together a very good program here for us tonight. We're going to hear from Dr. Ibsen's marvelous victory, which affects a lot of people. Pat Irwin is back with us. Again, I just found out that Marilyn Stubbs is with us, and she's that 81-year-old person with arachnoiditis who is still mobile and out there working out every day. So we've got a lot of nice guests here. The educational the message today is one that I'm really glad to give, and that is, let's start with this. You hear a lot about pain, of course, and these days people seem to want to change the definition of pain and one thing or another, and you hear about high impact pain, chronic pain, acute pain, all these different terms. But I want to talk about pain from a clinical point of view for a moment. As a physician, and trying to treat somebody with chronic pain, particularly severe bad pain, there's one question that you got to know. And it's the very most important clinical thing that a physician can know, and that is this. Is your pain periodic? Does it come and go? Or is it constant? Is it there all the time? Does it never go away? And the second question is, was there a time in your life when it did go away sometimes, at least for a few hours or a few days? Or is it now just stuck? It never goes away regardless of what you do. That's really the definition of intractable pain. And over time, doctors have written about it for centuries, and they've been befuddled by it for a long, long time. Why do some people have a pain that just won't go away, regardless of whether you give them opioids or electric currents, or regardless of what you do? It's stuck. It's constant. So that's the number one clinical question. It's not whether you have high impact pain or what your health plan is or whether you've got opioid use disorder. Is your pain, does it ever go away? Now, what's interesting about this is that it's been now about a decade in which a breakthrough was made on why the pain was constant. Up until that time, I treated patients for 50 years. Never knew why. But about 10 years ago, we had our first breakthrough. Some very brilliant basic science researchers found out that in the central nervous system, you would have inflammation in the brain or in the spinal cord, just like you would have on a cut on the hands or in your bronchitis or in your bladder if you had a kidney infection. In other words, they found what's now called neuroinflammation. But what's more than that, because neuroinflammation was sort of known before 10 years ago, but what they knew 10 years ago, and part of it had to do with technology, the ability to look at brain cells and spinal cord cells or to analyze them and see what happened to them. And what they found out was that there's a certain cell, which is now goes by the rubric or label, glial cells were inflamed. Now, glial cells have a different type. Some are astrocytes, some are oligodendrocytes, some are microglial cells, but we just use the term glial cells, G-L-I-A. And I do think that every patient, every practitioner, everybody concerned with treating pain really needs to know what a glial cell is. Now, a glial cell in the central nervous system has a lot of different functions, but its primary function is a little bit like a lymphocyte or a white blood cell count. It is sort of like the protective cell of the central nervous system. And what they found out was about 10 years ago is that that glial cell would develop inflammation. And that the glial cell inflammation in turn would render the receptors either dysfunctional or even destroy them. And therefore, it was the dysfunctional receptors that caused the chronic pain, the pain that wouldn't go away. Okay? Now, I want to stop right here for a minute. If you're listening to this and you're a person who's got constant pain, doesn't go away, you know two things right now. You know that you have had or currently have glial cell neuroinflammation. And secondly, you know that some of your receptors that control pain aren't working. You've either lost them, they're damaged, or they're covered with inflammation and they don't work. Okay? So you know that right out front. Right out front. Now, let's talk about those receptors because some of you may not know quite what I'm talking about. A receptor is a term that was coined many, many years ago because it was known that there are these little microanatomic spots in the nervous system, both the spinal cord and the brain, that would receive either biochemicals called neurotransmitters or would receive a nutrient like a vitamin C or a medication like a Valium or a Vicodin. It would receive things. And so as it received things, it would trigger an action. And it was called a receptor. I'd have preferred they called it an action point, but they called it a receptor. And I think a lot of you who have listened to us here know that since that 10 years ago, about 7 receptors have been different ones identified in the central nervous system that control pain. The major ones that control pain, of course, are the endorphin receptor that receives the opioid drugs. And there's something called a gamma aminobutyric acid receptor that receives the Valium and the gabapentin and the Lyricas. And you have something called a dopamine receptor, and that receives such things as dextroamphetamine, caffeine, and modafinil. And then you've got the cannabinoid receptor, you've got a serotonin receptor, you've got something called an NMDA receptor, but you've got 7 of them. And in order to get good pain relief, you've probably got to trigger at least 2 or 3 of those a day. And if you have constant pain, okay, you're not going to get by with just one receptor being triggered. You're going to have multiple ones being triggered. That's the biggest failing I see when I look at treatment plans. They're relying too much on Lyrica, too much on gabapentin, too much on ketamine, too much on Vicodin. They're relying too much on one agent. That's a real failing. But I want to go further for a minute. Once it was discovered 10 years ago or so that you had these receptors and that neuroinflammation would knock them out or damage them or cover them with inflammation and render them dysfunctional, guess what? Nobody knew where the inflammation came from. Okay? And there are different theories sprung up. And a bunch of phony terms like central sensitization and hyperalgesia and psychotherapy and opioid use disorder sprung up mainly because you had these glial cells, you had inflammation, and you had receptors, but nobody knew why. Okay? And we went ahead and had to treat it, but we had no understanding really of what happened. Now, in 2021, just about 3 years ago, we finally got a clue on what went wrong and why the glial cells developed the neuroinflammation. I think some of you may be getting tired of me talking about the Epstein-Barr virus. Get set to get more tired, okay? Because I'm going to talk about it a little more. I wouldn't be here giving this program if it wasn't for an article that I came across in 2021. Now, the title, I'm going to read it to you. It's right here. Glial cell response to Epstein-Barr virus infection, a plausible contribution to virus-associated inflammatory reactions in the brain. This was the first paper that said that virus will activate the glial cells and produce neuroinflammation. So I read the paper. It's one of those papers that was probably me and 3 other people in the world read it. Nobody knew what it meant. Well, I knew what it meant. And that's when I decided to saddle up on the Epstein-Barr horse and start writing that guy, okay? I knew they were onto it. I said, oh my gosh, that's the first time in my career we've got an answer out here. Well, since 2021, give the basic science researchers some credit. Let me read you some titles since 2021. Epstein-Barr virus, a trigger of autoimmune glial fibrillary acidic protein astrocytopathy. Big long term means what they said in 21 is duplicated in 2022. Here's another one. Unraveling the links between neurodegeneration and Epstein-Barr virus mediated cell cycle dysregulation. Are you getting the picture here now, folks? How about this one? This is 2023. We're moving up now. Unpacking the CNS manifestations of Epstein-Barr virus and imaging perspective. In other words, they could start seeing the Epstein-Barr dirty work on the CT scans. I've now taken a new look at brain scans. I can see the tissue damage on a lot of these brain scans of people with constant pain or intractable pain. You can see it on a regular brain scan. And lastly, cancer-causing virus affects the glial cells in central nervous system. Okay, that's 2024. So what's the lesson for today? We now know something. We now know that the Epstein-Barr virus and all its dirty work companions like COVID and cytomegalovirus and herpes 6 and Lyme disease and mycoplasma causes what we now call parasitic reactivation and the development of autoimmunity. Again, a lot of people who hear this show and who are in contact with our studies are aware of this. But I wanted to bring it to you is that we now have kind of closed the loop. We've got the patient with a constant pain just won't go away. And before that, the pain came and gone, and they could take care of it with a little naproxen and a tramadol and maybe a little tinge in it, or maybe just taking a walk. But then it became constant. We didn't know why until 10 years ago or so. We knew that you had something called a glial cell. You knew something that they had neuroinflammation. We knew that receptors were wiped out, so you couldn't have a brain or spinal cord that would shut down the pain. And now in the last couple of 3 years, we now know that the parasitic virus, Epstein-Barr, needs to be taken seriously. And we've got an answer for why these things occur. Now, lastly, then we're going to move on. The good laboratories in America haven't been sleeping either. They have now developed a panel of about 5 Epstein-Barr tests that any nurse practitioner, PA, chiropractor, you can even order some of them without a prescription, but there's about 5 tests out there. And if a doctor or some medical person or even a patient learns how to interpret these things, you can read it just like a book. It'll tell you whether you've been having recurrent reactivation. It'll tell whether you've got autoimmunity. It'll tell you whether the virus is invading your tissues. It'll give you a roadmap on what to do about it. Okay? So that's the educational message for today. Anyway, I want to move on to one of 2 great victories you're going to hear about on the advocacy front today. It is my great pleasure to call on my good colleague, Dr. Mark Ibsen, who tonight is, he's not just going to be pressing the questions, he's going to answer a few, okay? Now, he has just won a major victory for doctors, pain patients, and society in Montana, okay? And I have asked him to unmodestly give us a report from his perspective on what he was charged with, how he won the case, and what it means for all of us. There are some issues here that are kind of a first of a kind and kind of represent a turning point. And then you're going to hear, incidentally, a little while later from Pat Irwin, another turning point almost at the same time. Anyway, Mark, are you there?
I am.
From your perspective, would you tell us what you got charged with? What happened? And then lastly, what do you think it means for everybody listening to this program, plus all their friends? Take it away.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Tennant. All right, I'm going to show you everyone the secret weapon, the way to defeat the medical board. Ready?
Hi, Susan.
She's the one. She'll do it. She kicked their butts. Okay, so on December 3rd, I participated in a panel discussion about pain refugees with the Cato Institute. And the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank, and the doctor that does most of their research is Dr. Jeff Singer. He invited me, our patient, Brandy Stokes, Kate Nicholson, a attorney with chronic pain, and Ron Chapman, a defense attorney for doctors who've been attacked by the DEA. That was a very successful panel, and I put a link to it in the comments. 3 days after I participated in that panel, well, let me tell you about the participation. In that panel, I mentioned 6 patients who died when I retired from prescribing opiates in 2017, when Dr. Chris Christensen was charged with and convicted of manslaughter in Montana for treating patients in pain. Parenthetically, Dr. Tennant was in Montana when Dr. Christensen was on trial, and his raid of his office and home happened while Dr. Tennant was in Montana. You know, more convoluted stuff. So I memorialized the patients who died, 6 of them. I mentioned their names. Gratefully, none of them died of taking a medication that I had prescribed them. 3 shot themselves. 2 had complications of alcohol. And alcohol treats pain, and it's pretty good, but it has consequences, of course. And the 6th patient took a non-opiate overdose. So I mentioned all that, and the Board of Medicine filed a complaint to me 3 days later that I had violated HIPAA. Or actually what they said is Dr. Ibsen may have violated HIPAA. So all hands on deck, called my attorney. We were scheduled for a December 20th hearing. We got them to postpone it to February 21st. And in that February 21st hearing, prior to that, my attorney, John Flannery, filed a 72-page brief that basically pulled them up short, essentially. In that brief, we gave enough evidence to realize I did not violate HIPAA, which didn't take much evidence. But so the other thing that happened 5 days before this hearing is this person got over 100 of you to send letters to the Board of Medicine and got at least 59 and people that got on the call, and many more tried to get on and couldn't. And so the Board of Medicine, basically their Zoom application was overwhelmed by the number of people that came on the phone. And I'm just going to tell you, I felt like George Bailey at the end of It's a Wonderful Life. You know, that kind of response. That's what makes a difference with these medical boards. The first time they went after me, I had hundreds of people in the hearing rooms. The rooms weren't big enough for all the people that came. And my friend Ariella Marshall, she got all those people to come. So what the boards don't like is a lot of people from the public showing up saying, wait a second, what's this about? They don't have any oversight. And so we have to be their oversight. And I can't be their oversight if they're attacking me. So my patients showed up both times. And I think it's a model that's worth replicating. And I'm going to say this right now. Any doctor that gets attacked by their medical board or gets arrested, they need to have a press conference right away. They need to go public, and they need to push back vigorously through print media, video media, and social media. And you know, I did that. The board didn't like it. In fact, I've had 10 complaints against me from the medical board in 19 years. Well, it was 10. I'll get to that in a moment. And they lost every one of them. The last I'm going to say about this is I expected to be euphoric about this victory. And it's taken me a long time to process all the grief that's there anyway. Dr. Tennant asked me to mention, and I think it's worth mentioning, that one of the doctors on the board, 2 of the doctors on the board, sort of pushed back against the lawyers on the board. And they basically rebelled and said, Dr. Ibsen didn't, you know, this thing was about HIPAA. HIPAA wasn't even mentioned during the Zoom meeting. And they just basically said, I abandoned this patient, which I, of course, didn't and wouldn't. And that patient died of a gunshot wound to the head. So I noticed a little sliver, maybe a little crack, maybe somehow with presentations like Monty Goddard and Pat Irving and other people presenting on the Zoom call itself. I saw a little glint of a possibility for us to develop a relationship with the Board of Medicine. My relationship has been fraught. But what I think we can do is go to some Board of Medicine meetings and talk about what we want them to pay attention to. Ironically, they won't let you talk about the issues at hand at the meeting where that's being dealt with.
The agenda.
So yeah, the agenda. Thank you. See what I mean? And so you have to go to these board meetings and pipe up in the first 5 minutes, say we'd like to talk about this, and maybe they'll put it on an agenda. So that's what I learned positively. I'm so proud of you all and all of us who've been energized by this victory with the Board of Medicine, because I think it's the first time I encountered a doctor who was willing to look at the case from start to finish and not have a predetermined definition of Dr. Ibsen's a bad doctor, we have to take him out no matter what. Instead, this one doctor, Dr. Geyer, essentially looked at the case with fresh eyes, and saw that there was no violation at all. Not of HIPAA, not of professionalism, not of appropriate medical care. So I consider it a victory for us, a victory for the patients, a victory for the sacred physician-patient relationship.
Mark, let me just ask you this. I think I'm asking a question that I already know the answer to, and that is, it was very clear that they, in the past, medical boards, DEA, the U.S. attorneys, they haven't worried at all about having any public exposure because no one could get to them. And so therefore they could bring up any charge they wanted to, and no one would challenge them. So you figured out a way to do this, because they obviously knew you hadn't done anything wrong, but they just wanted to, let's be honest about it, they just wanted to denigrate you, besmirch you, humiliate you, and ridicule you, okay? I mean, the people in the public life know that the way you go after your enemies is to ridicule them. So that's all they were trying to do, it looks to me like. Yeah.
Well,
Susan?
that's true. That is true. And the more you push back, the more upset they get. But what other option do we have? We could roll over, and that hasn't helped. and so I agree that's definitely their agenda is to win some sort of narrative. Like we want all the pain medicines to go away. We don't care if the patients die. Some people have equated it to the T4 program in Germany, and I don't know if that's true or not, but if you actually look at the results, you can see that people are dying of suicide. They're dying of acute adrenal failure, cardiac failure, stroke. Lots of patients are not getting their blood pressure taken care of. Pain patients who get fired from their doctor, they're also not getting their other medicines that their doctor provides. So we are kind of pariahs in the medical system, and not just because of pain. If you don't treat pain, your blood pressure is too high, you're going to have a stroke, and all of a sudden nobody cares about blood pressure levels that are off the charts. Whereas if there wasn't any pain medication involved, you'd get a question to the doctor, why aren't you controlling this person's blood pressure? So yeah, there's a lot of variables. We're making progress, though. That's what I have to say. And one last thing I have to say is I got another complaint. So I had a week without a complaint, and I got a new one. I'll tell you about that later. It's going to take a while to unfold. So we just have to keep our spirits up. That's her job. Keep my spirits up. And don't give up. This only cost me $40,000. It could have cost me $250,000 if it had gone any further. So my attorney said, well, it's not really a Pyrrhic victory because there's a lot of people who are alive today because you won this case. And I'm just moved by that. So thank you, everybody.
No question. Scott, Dr. Guest, are you handy here?
I'm here.
Good. Give me your thoughts on Mark's ordeal and his win over the Montana board. What are your thoughts, and how do you read what's happened here?
Well, first somebody has to answer a question for me. I didn't think you could violate the HIPAA of a dead person.
You can't. That's why they brought the charge.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
Evidently, I'll just explain that to the best I can. There is actually some statutes in HIPAA that say that it's protected health information for 50 years. There is no expiration of a reasonable statute of limitation. So I was under the same impression, Dr. Guest, and so. It turns out that in the fine print, it's probably 600 pages of HIPAA. Like, ask somebody if they've ever read it. Nobody has.
Right.
It's sort of like not reading the CDC guidelines. It's the same sort of superstitious fear of badness. And there's a big hopper, and you throw in all kinds of scaredy cat stuff. I had staff in my clinic that would run around and flip all the charts over, interfering in my productivity. And they'd say, well, we can't have anybody looking at that. Well, does that include me? Because I'm taking care of the patient. So there's lots of myths. That myth hasn't been answered yet adequately, as far as I can tell. But we proved prior to the hearing that no HIPAA violation occurred. So during the hearing, they had nothing to say other than my care was poor, and it wasn't. So the advantage of hitting them right up front with some data and then insisting that they read it. My attorney gave them, I think, 5 different instances where he said my due process rights were being violated, and they did it anyway. But I think they realized in their Star Chamber meeting that we could push this farther, but Dr. Ibsen has already pointed out that we're violating his due process rights. So this isn't going to go anywhere if we suspend his license today. And it's a miracle to me that it happened that way. And thank God for John Flannery, that's for sure.
So they turn around and file a new complaint so they can try and go after it that way. Yeah. To answer your question, Dr. Tennant, boards are they're little fiefdoms of people who think they just want to be in control. We're dealing that with the boards out here in California as well. Me personally, a number of years ago, where they just, they make stuff up. They don't read the data that's in front of them. And there's a process or a thing called regulatory capture, where these boards get basically captured, or they are trying to enforce somebody else's agenda, even though there's no law or regulation against what's happened.
Yeah, very well said. Someone else.
Can I add to that real quick?
Sure.
There is a thing that people could look up, or doctors should at least, called sham peer review. SHAM, sham as in sham or bullshit. Peer review, and essentially that's what's been happening to me and many others. Interestingly, I have a colleague from my residency. I've known this gentleman 44 years. He has a California license, and because he did not look up cures on every time he saw the patient, even though there's a pharmacist looking it up too, they're pulling his license, and it'll cost him $500,000 to fight for it. He's 71 years old. He's had MS for 24 years, and he's cashing in. He's just done, because he's not going to spend his retirement. Mine's already gone, but he's not going to spend his whole retirement fund it is so costly to defend your license before these boards, and there's no recrimination for them if they're doing it inappropriately. So yeah, it's power set.
No accountability for the boards. They can do whatever they want. And interesting, you said sham peer review, because I'd also like to put peer in quotes, because very rarely is the peer that reviews your files have anything to do with pain management. It's some general practitioner or some other nature that they hired to make sure that they get the answer they want. I think Dr. Tennant's real familiar with that one.
Yeah, boy.
Actually, I know he is.
Yeah, you get familiar with these tricks after a while. We're going to move on now, but following this train of thought, we're going to call Pat Irving, one of our good long friends, forward, because she's going to tell you about the case and what happened, and it's very important. But what's interesting, none of us know about it, because one of the problems that we have had in trying to bring some relief for pain and suffering in this country has been we've had no formats. Okay? Jamie Sanchez had the idea for this podcast. Thank you, Jamie, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. We've got to have a way to get to the public to tell the facts as to why people are literally being sent to their grave in some cases, made to suffer, being deprived of cheap, simple medicines. It's really sad. But I'm going to bring Pat on now. And Pat, are you here? She was here. Jimmy, can you drag her up?
Yes, sir. She is here and she was unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
There we
Oh,
are.
yes.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect.
good. I was getting worried.
Me too. All right, there you go.
Oh,
Pat,
Welcome, Pat.
first off, I want you to tell us a little bit about, of course, this case that you've been involved with. You're going to have to start right from the start because you've not had the benefit of getting any publicity about what you've done. Nobody knows about it, but it's very significant. And so start at the beginning. Now, first off, let me just introduce you. Pat is an RN. For years, she was an executive at Kaiser, actually having something to do with enforcing or helping people in pain. So I would like for you to start with what was your job with Kaiser, and then how did you go from there to being this patient advocate on the benefit of all of us? Start there.
Thank you, Dr. Tennant. Yes, I did work for Kaiser for over 35 years. And most of that, I did some of that time I was in clinical nursing and maternal child health and neonatal care. But I soon kind of progressed into doing quality assurance and then later risk management and patient safety. And so that definitely had to do with patients' well-being, including pain management. And the last position I had was a position that had oversight for all of the Kaiser regions. So Georgia and Washington State and Portland, Colorado, all across the United States, we would put programs together to ensure patient safety. Unfortunately, Kaiser has certainly gone downhill since that time. And at the time that I worked for them, all I will say is I was very proud to work for them. I think we did good work. I'm hoping to be their conscience now. And the case I'm going to bring you is a Kaiser case. And you're right about the publicity. If we can get more publicity on this case, I'm hoping, if anything, we will turn Kaiser around so they will come back to the organization that they used to be. The case, other people involved in the case, not just myself. Dr. Ibsen volunteered to work on this case, as did Rich Redlawhern, and a gentleman named Larry Peskin, who you'll be meeting. He's a clinical psychologist, and he's an attorney in Ohio. And he has volunteered his time to help us work on the case. So we're very grateful for everyone who jumped in to do that. An overview, this patient was, and I do not have a non-disclosure, so I can pass this information on. The 34-year-old with a history of Crohn's disease, Ehlers-Danlos, mast cell, and POTS. And she had been stable on oral Dilaudid for over 15 years and had been at times very active. When she was younger, she was a volunteer police officer, a cadet, and had done many things in her community. Unfortunately, in the fall of 2022, Kaiser decided to mass force taper all of its patients on pain medication. No rationale except to say it was for patient safety, and everyone's coming off, including myself. And this patient was one of those patients who was force tapered. She was very fortunate. Her father, Frank Aiello, who may be on this call, I'm not sure, he was very active in defending her and very wise to start an arbitration for her. So she would not have been able to do this fight on her own. I want to be very clear. Putting up a fight against Kaiser is extremely difficult. It requires you going through an arbitration process. But her name is Kristen. Kristen's father is very astute and very strategic and was able to start this lawsuit for her. Interestingly, what we did not have is an attorney. And Frank got together with me and asked if I could pull some experts together, which I did, including Mark and Red and Larry. And we decided to go this case without an attorney. I'm not advising that other people do that, but we decided we wanted to win this case for Kristen. So we went about it. So early in 2023, we started getting the information out of her medical records, and we found that she had been tapered quickly from 864 MME. I know that's not a term we like to use, but it'll give you an idea. 864 to 180 MME in a month. In a month. And she was understandably went through horrible withdrawal symptoms. Her pain came back, no surprise. And she had 2 emergency department visits in a 2-month period because they had destabilized her. And all this time, they are still saying, oh, it's for patient safety. Yeah, patient safety. And yeah. Interestingly, in the case that got brought up, we kind of learned as we went along with a lot of help from Larry Peskin. Right away, they threw at us what's called a motion for summary judgment. What that means is Kaiser is telling the arbitrator that these guys, this Frank and Pat Irving and Mark, and they don't have a case. These guys don't have any evidence. Just throw this case out the door. And so right away, our job was, it was massive, pull it together, get all the facts, get the experts together, and prove that we did have a case. And we did that by, and this is really, really important, we did this by looking at the California guidelines, which were pain guidelines, which were in our favor. We looked at the California Department of Public Health, their policy statements. We looked at the California Patient Bill of Rights and the intractable pain law. Thank you, Dr. Tennant. And we looked at the California Business and Professional Code, which deals with unprofessional behavior, including all of the lying that was going on. All of those guidelines were in favor. They violated every single guideline in the book, even the hated CDC guidelines. They didn't even do that right. They violated everything. And then when Dr. Ibsen came on board, as you know, only a physician can review standard of care. So Dr. Ibsen was the one that then reviewed the case and said the standard of care for pain management was not met. And it was not met because they left her in excruciating pain. They did not see her in that entire month period that she was crashing and was in withdrawal. No visits, no medications to stabilize her, nothing. And so he was able, as a physician, to review that chart and make that statement, which was extremely, we wouldn't have had a case without Dr. Ibsen. It was very valuable to us. So we put all this together, and you put it together in something called a declaration and then an opposition to the summary judgment. And we submitted it. A week went by, 2 weeks went by. The 3rd week, we got notification. We had passed summary judgment. We knocked it on its head. They looked at our evidence. They looked at the guidelines. They looked at what Dr. Ibsen had said, what Red had said, and what I had said. And the arbitrator said, you have a case. Mind you, we had no attorney at this point. You have a case and you can proceed. So we quickly regrouped. Thank heavens at this point, because we were all about going crazy, we were able to get an attorney. The difference is, and this is really important for the group, is attorneys don't want to take the case until you can kind of show you have something to go there. Attorneys still aren't going to jump into a pain management case. But when we could show we passed summary judgment, we got a wonderful attorney. He came in, he looked at the case, he said, at this point, your best bet is mediation, which is just the patient and the arbitrator and the mediator and the opposition attorneys get together in a room to discuss the case. And I cannot tell you what the resolution was. What I can tell you is the patient and the family was exceedingly happy with the resolution. That's all I can tell you. They were thrilled. So the case ended. The patient now has what they need to go forward to hopefully get pain management. Here's the missing piece, Dr. Tennant. All the work we did is great, but It didn't force Kaiser to stop its forced tapers, right? Nothing we did with this one patient could change the policy. So the reason we want publicity now is we want this to get out. It can get out. There's nothing holding it back. I don't have a non-disclosure. Mark doesn't have a non-disclosure. Larry doesn't have a non-disclosure. We want this out. So we put pressure on Kaiser so they realize they have to back down. They have to start treating their patients in pain. And that's the issue. And I thank you so much, Dr. Tennant, for letting me tell everyone about this case.
It's, I'm not sure whether I'm happy or whether I'm just going to cry about it. It's pathetic. Let me tell you what, and I would want to call on other people. What really bothers me about this case is this absolute lie that they're saying, we're going to take you off 864 MMEs for your own safety.
Your own safety.
That's such a bold-faced lie,
Yeah.
coming from a prestigious institution. But we've now gotten used to being lied to from NIH, whether it's about COVID, and now the lies about opioids are you don't know what to say.
Right.
Except we've got to start attacking the other thing. I don't know on what to say. That and obviously, if you hadn't intervened, she probably would have died. And of course, maybe that's what they wanted. I hate to ask you that. Is that what they wanted?
They simply, the people making the decision, I think were so far, and I'm not making excuses, I think we're so far removed from the doctors on the front line. I can tell you did not want to do this. My doctor did not want to do this. So I can tell you the frontline physicians, most of them did not want to do them. Some of them kind of played along. But unfortunately, the insurer, Kaiser Northern California as a whole, up the food chain, we think we know where, we don't know exactly, but we think we know where, made this decision, and they were going to hold to it no matter what. They did not care. I mean, 50 patients, 60 patients, 70 patients, all force tapered.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question that might surprise you. It's an insurance company, right?
Right.
Now here's the question. I thought insurance companies wanted to reduce costs.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
The cheapest thing they could do for patients is opioid maintenance of chronic pain, and they don't want that.
Yeah.
So in essence, they want more expensive treatments.
Yeah.
Now, can you relate to that?
The rationale that finally makes sense, Dr. Tennant, is they are more afraid of the DEA, the injunction that we keep talking about, this national opioid settlement, this injunctive relief, which puts pressure on them. Injunctive relief puts horrible pressure on them. And then the DEA, they are more afraid of that than they are the money. This was all about, basically, they sacrificed the patients to make their physicians secure. So their physicians could not be attacked by the DEA, attacked by this injunction, that their doctors would be safe. And they threw their patients out the door under the bus.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that.
You know, I did the same thing, Dr. Tennant. In 2017, when Dr. Christensen was convicted, I just said the writing's on the wall. It's a hostile regulatory environment. I'm not doing this anymore. And 6 of my patients died. I didn't expect that carnage to happen. But I learned from that. It was like a little mini demonstration project or a little mini study. And so when doctors are threatened, the only way you can defend yourself is with your own wealth. And it is devastating. Even though I've won my cases, I'm out of money. So essentially, it's impossible to fight these people unless you are a rebel, and I am.
And I am too.
The
Yeah.
DEA has no business dictating the practice of medicine to anyone. And it is from their letter, Lee de Provenzano letter, Thomas Proven, he is was the director of the version DEA, and he comes out and he addresses it to Richard Lawhorn, he addresses to another guy, and Dr. Ronald and Dr. Walter Wren, and he states it clearly that the DEA, and there's a letter sent to, I think it was a congresswoman, a letter that Julie Kisselworth sent to us, okay? And it is so clear. They said that the Congress never authorized the DEA, it's not authorized to dictate the practice of medicine and what a doctor prescribed, the amount that they prescribe to anyone. And they have been simply able to get it. And you're right about what Dr. Ibsen has said, that social activism is what saved the day for him. And thank you so much.
Yeah, Norm, thank you so much. It's good,
Yeah.
Right to the point. Pat, this I'm so glad you're on the show because, quite frankly, I didn't realize this case was so horrible. EDS, intractable pain, POTS, from 864 down to 180. You don't know quite what to say other than that they might have well pulled out the guillotine.
Yeah.
Now, let's go back to this thing a while ago, and then Mark and Scott, we had lots of you folks were good enough to sound off on Dr. Ibsen's behalf. Now, Pat, who else have you been able to tell this case to other than this show? Anybody ask you about it?
No, and I
Nope.
have no, we would love to tell our story to a bigger audience again. And I think forgot to mention something important. We're going to put together, and when I say we, I mean the experts on the case, called a playbook. And we're going to put together all of the lessons that we learned in the case so that, and it will be free and open to any pain patient who wants it in case they have a situation where they can fight. Not every patient can do what we did and take this to an arbitration or a court case, but there will be patients that can, and we're going to develop a playbook with everything in it, all the things we learned, what to do, what not to do, what to avoid, and we want to publish that so it's free to patients to use in their own fights.
I like that idea. Would you? And we've heard from other people that we've had in Illinois. We've had Kat up there getting us legislation passed. Dave Smith is on the rampage in Arizona. We seem to be getting somewhere, but we are shut out of everything. I mean, our community, if you will, advocacy community, we're sort of like gorillas in the jungle. We run out every once in a while and clobber a couple of people and then run back in and regather our forces, and we run out again and clobber somebody.
Is that what they mean by guerrilla warfare? I didn't know.
So anyway.
Yeah, you just thought it was
glove.
people throwing bananas around.
Yeah, we're the mirrors of 2025. Really, I think that I want to close the show with this. I think that we need to vigorously go forward from where we're at right now. I don't know whether it's barnstorming the country, whether it's more podcasts, publications, whatever, but I think the iron is hot. I think that, they're sure out there bad mouthing us in lay publications every week now. Kalodny's back telling us that everybody's opioid use disorder. The agenda for the American Society of Addiction Medicine holds their meeting coming up next month, and you wouldn't want to see their agenda. So we really need to go forward. So may I ask you, you've got some great people working with you. let's come up with a good forward game plan, okay?
Sounds
Along
good.
with that
Yeah.
line. We're just,
Thank you.
anybody,
I'm
Jamie, did you have a comment there? Or Scott?
Yes, I was going to see if Larry Peskin
Could
had
you?
something that he would like to add. We
Yeah.
still have about 7.5 minutes, so I know Larry's with us. If
Yeah.
you'd
So,
like to,
can
would
you
you
hear
like
me?
to?
Oh, Larry,
Sure.
Larry.
Yes,
I didn't know you
Larry,
were-
oh,
Larry.
good.
I probably should.
Got the
I
last
probably
5
should.
minutes.
I probably should
Take
come
it,
on
Larry.
another time when I have more time because I've got a unique perspective on this based on my career moves as well as where I was located geographically. So let me just quickly say, I started my career as a psychologist running chronic pain treatment programs as a clinical director. I developed some of the few that were in the Midwest. And opioid dependence in that population was an issue. And in those patients where it was an issue, they voluntarily participated in a treatment program where we were able to reduce or eliminate their use of opiates and do a bunch of other things. That all being said, was never something that was intended to apply to everybody. It was only a select population, and there was a specific model for treating it. Then I became a lawyer, and as a lawyer, I was doing medical negligence cases and also some mass tort and class action work. So I understand what happened with the whole opiate MDL, partly because I was also practicing in Northeast Ohio, where it was located. That was the head of it. So I litigated then some opiate overdose death cases. One might think that would maybe anti-opiate, but no, it was a very, again, limited group of people, generally managed by incompetent physicians, most often killed by putting them on methadone and not knowing how to do a conversion, or doing something else that was clearly below the standard of care. And the tort system was prepared to handle that. Along comes PROP and this group who comes from addiction medicine. It has nothing to do with treating pain. And they are responsible for creating a money-making machine involving the lawyers, the experts, the company that manufactures Suboxone. It is a whole clear through line that you can draw. Chad Colas has done it in a really brilliant PowerPoint to show all these connections here. So, I have a very strong feeling about all of this stuff. And it was sort of at the center of it. So I was cautioning lawyers involved in the MDL about what were you going to do at the end of the day here, knowing that there was going to be a big pot of money, and being concerned that their answer was to take everybody who is opiate dependent and a chronic pain patient and run them through a 12-step drug rehab program. That was their answer for everything. So there's this failure to understand the difference between dependence and addiction, and the interference of addiction medicine in the treatment of pain is what I believe is at the center of this whole problem. I could expand on it and would love to some other time.
Here, here.
The whole picture.
Good job. Thanks, Larry.
Larry,
Yes.
we obviously need you back for a little
Yes.
more conversation, shall we?
I'd be happy to do that.
You
would be happy to do
obviously
that.
have the background that we need.
And I will say that on the issue, there's a case to be made here that could be brought on behalf of a class of chronic pain patients. Unfortunately, the lawyers don't see the money in that.
Sure.
And they have been on the wrong side of this and have created much of this mess. My legal brethren, and especially in the mass tort world. If anybody wants to understand just how scummy mass tort litigation is, I recommend a book that John Grisham wrote about 25 or 30 years ago called King of Torts. Read that book and you'll understand just how awful this whole system is.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And again, thank you for helping out on the Kaiser case.
And I will say this, one of the reasons I got involved with the Kaiser case is I spent a year as a contract provider for the addiction medicine department in Kaiser San Jose while they were in the middle of trying to force taper people. And they were sending people to addiction medicine to try to get us to help them get these patients off of their generic opioids and onto Suboxone. That's the game plan.
Yes. Maybe you can come back and tell us how successful that's been.
Unfortunately, too successful, but yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you all for all this effort. It's been a great newsy show, if you want to call it that. Let's carry on. As I pointed out, we're got a head of steam up. We do need to go forward again.
All
Thank
right.
you so much. for-
Nice meeting all of you, and I'll be happy to come back on again.
Thank you,
You
Larry.
betcha. Thanks, Larry. Good
All
night.
right, bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Lord. I'm thankful for each of you, and we will see you next week. God bless you. You're not alone. Please stay alive. You are loved. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Jamie.
Jamie.
Thank you,
Jamie, guys.
Great show.
Thank you, everybody. Dr. Tennant.
Everyone, please keep praying for each other. We love you. Good night.
Love you guys.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See y'all next week.
You all. Love you.
Bless.
Bless.